The Soul series are known for their brutal, yet awesome boss fights and their really cool mechanics. And in today's video, I'm going to be ranking the top 10 most underrated bosses. And what I love about this topic is it's so diverse. Underrated can be any single boss. It can be a great boss, it could be a horrible boss, it can just be your average Joe regular boss. And before we get into the top 10, I want to give some honorable mentions. And at first, I was thinking Beta Chaos, but after my 3 recent playthroughs, which is a little shameless plug right here, I realized that this boss is absolutely horrible. The run back, the gameplay, it's literally 3 seconds of fighting for a 4-minute run back. The only moderately good part about this fight is progress saves. And our first real honorable mention is Guardian Ape from Sekiro. I really enjoy this boss. I think the first phase is super fun. It can be a little off at times because Sekiro is more meant for one-on-one sword combat, but I think his second phase really steps it up and I really enjoy that fight. I don't think it's hated on, but I just think it's a little bit underrated. My second and last honorable mention is the Spirit Godfrey, the one you fight in the capital, and I honestly think this captures one of the best moments of the regular Godfrey fight, but obviously it's not as good as that fight because he's super easy, has very little health, and is, pretty forgettable. Also, before we get into the top 10, can you guys please like and perhaps even subscribe? And coming in at the 10th spot is the Spear Half-Light Church guy from Dark Souls 3. Now, I'm definitely not saying this is a good boss. I personally think it's a little lazy and super easy, and well, its idea doesn't work out most of the time, but on paper, this is a pretty cool boss fight. Firstly, it's very unique in the sense that you will fight another person. You're not just fighting them regularly, you're fighting them as a boss, so they have more HP and all this special shit, which I honestly think if there was lots of people doing this boss for PvP, it would be really fun. But in most cases, it's just going to be a bot since there's not going to be anyone really your level or just on at that time. And the bot encounters, for the most part, are pretty lame. I mean, it's obviously the same, but it's just like, it's pretty repetitive. It's just like your regular lame NPC encounter. And I see people putting this in their top 3 worst bosses in Dark Souls 3, and like in the top 10 worst bosses in the Soul series, which I think couldn't be farther from the truth. I think this is a pretty mediocre, maybe on the worser side of bosses, but I don't think it's anywhere near the top 30 worst bosses in the Soul series. And coming in 9th place is Lady Butterfly from Sekiro. Now for me personally, this is one of my favorite bosses in the game. I think the second phase is a unique little touch that makes it a lot more entertaining, but I'm pretty sure that's what wears people off of giving this boss lots of attention. Now I know this boss isn't heavily hated on, but this is usually towards more the bottom of the list, where I honestly think it should be towards pretty high up to the top. And yes, I know this boss has one pretty big flaw, where you can just do that dash thing and spam RB, and that literally counters the entire boss, and it's a free win. But if you just don't do that, this boss is pretty challenging, has tons of unique moves that will catch you off guard and surprise you at every moment, and I just think it's a really unique and fun and just entertaining fight. And coming in 8th place is the Cleric Beast from Bloodborne, which is going to be the only boss from Bloodborne on this list, and that is because I think every boss in Bloodborne is rated towards the higher end of the scale, if not a little bit overrated. So this is the only boss that I think in Bloodborne deserves a little bit more of praise. And I honestly kind of compare the Cleric Beast to Asylum Demon. Even though the Cleric Beast is optional and the Asylum Demon is not, I do still think they are very similar in the ways that they teach you how to play the game, like how they both teach you the mechanics. The Asylum Demon teaches you how to plunge attack and just to do some regular dodging and attacking, and so does the Cleric Beast. It teaches you about all the new mechanics in this game that you are not familiar with and how to use them and how to perfect them, honestly. I also do love the soundtrack that's used for this boss. It is one of my favorites in all the Soul series, out of all the bosses or whatever. And also this boss just shows you what you're going to be in for during your playthrough with Bloodborne. And now in the 7th spot, I'm pretty sure we're in 7th place right now, that is going to be Godrick from Elden Ring. Now honestly, I don't hear lots of hate on this boss. I hear people call him pretty tame, pretty mid. They definitely do not consider this boss for one of the greats, and they definitely put him on the lower end of the scale, and that's mostly just because the bosses in Elden Ring are so good, they're so crazy, have such cool movesets, are such a spectacle to the eye, and you're just in awe while you fight them. So this boss gets very little praise, but honestly, I think for where he's at in the game, his moveset, the damage he does, the health he has, the stuff that he teaches you is very important. And I definitely think this guy's moveset is underrated. Like, before I started looking into this boss for this video, I thought he was just a pretty plain moveset, like even more plain than Morgott and every little mini boss that you fight, but that's just because he doesn't use a lot of VFX like all the other bosses later in the game do. His boss fight honestly has such a variety in the movesets. He has those tornado shit, he flies in the air, he does AoEs, he has regular attacks, he has all these cool different types of attacks that just make this boss fight so fun, so unique, and so different every time you want to fight him. And obviously you're going to fight Morgott right before this guy, and Morgott just blows you out of the water. He's the first boss in this game that you actually fight that is pretty crazy. So that alone obviously makes this guy a little bit lower on the list. That just makes people think of him lower, which honestly I really don't like, because I do think this is a really good boss fight. And on top of that, this guy has a really crazy cutscene, one of my favorites in the game, where he chops off his own arm and puts a fucking dragon on it to spew fire at you, which I think is really cool. And now for the 6th boss on this list, and I don't know how you guys are gonna feel about it. And I'll tell you it's an Elden Ring, that way I can give you a second to guess. And it's not Godskin Duo, but it is Fire Giant. Now, I know this boss has a bad rep and gets lots of hate, but honestly, I don't mind this boss. I think it's a pretty unique mix-up that provides for a entertaining fight and a refreshing fight at that. Now, recently I did just do a run where I only leveled up strength, which once you get to mid-game was basically a no-hit run. And let me tell you, this boss was very fucking annoying on no-hit, which made me put him a couple spots lower than I would have. Also, that's a shameless plug right there to that playthrough, check that out. But what I'm trying to get out here is that this boss has a couple of bullshit attacks that most likely you're gonna get hit at. It's almost a guarantee that you get hit, unless you either get lucky or are super duper skillful, which I find pretty annoying and pretty unfair. And I just really hate those ranged attacks that does, where he fucking gets on his knees in his second phase and does that spewing fire shit. It's so annoying. It just plays so passive aggressive, and the running away I don't like. But it's time to get to the things that I do like, because this is an underrated boss on my list after all. I personally think that this is a very strategical fight. Obviously because he has a lot of health and the elements, and you want to break his ankle and shit like that. But because once you get to his second phase and his first phase, where he throws out those fireballs that track you, I think that's a really fun and hard addition to the fight, because you gotta fight him and avoid him and dodge him while hitting him, while avoiding that fireball that tracks around you and explodes. So I think that's super fun, it's scary too, and it just gets a lot of emotion and feeling for that fight. I also do like how he's the only main boss, one of those fucking legendary bosses, that you were able to use Tordon before that recent DLC patch, so I thought that was pretty unique and cool about him. And now it's time to switch moods and head to Dark Souls Remastered. The boss that I'm choosing for Dark Souls Remastered, and I think 5th place it is, and that is Pinwheel. Now Pinwheel, I don't know where to get started on this guy. I think this is a very, very good boss fight with tons of crazy moves, especially for Dark Souls Remastered, a game that was released in, I'm pretty sure, 2009 or 2011, whatever it is. I think this boss has one of the best movesets in the entire game. I think it's one of the most unique bosses in the entire game. The only down parts about it is, firstly, you're going to find this endgame. He's an endgame boss in an endgame area, so I don't know why they made him have so little health and do so little damage. So when you get to him, you're not going to experience any of his new moves, any of his cool things, because you're going to kill him in 3 hits, and you're going to kill him within 20 seconds. Also, his aggression is pretty low, so it kind of just lets you hit him and doesn't really do much about it. But let me tell you, if they just up the aggression a little bit and times his health by 3, this would be a top 4 boss fight in that game. His attack patterns and his movesets are just so refreshing to every other fight in this game. He actually floats around you, he gives decoys, which are so cool, which I think is the only fight that does that in that game. And I like this boss and his moveset so much that I make sure to go and fight him during the early game. And now we're shifting right back to Elden Ring. This is going to be my last boss on this list that is from Elden Ring. And this might be a little bit of a hot take. I don't know, actually I have not really studied a lot about this boss and people's takes on him. But that's going to be Morgott, the fellow man, the one you fight right after the Godfrey Spirit. Now I'm putting this boss in this underrated category for 2 different reasons. I think he is a little bit underrated in terms of enjoyment. I think he's a little bit better than people say he is, but I'd honestly put him in honorable mentions for that. I'm putting him in this spot not only because of that, but also because I think he is super underrated in terms of difficulty. I think this boss is way harder than people say and act like he is. I honestly think this boss has the hardest moveset in the game. I know he doesn't have a lot of health, his poise can be broken really easily, and he's one of those bosses where you can dictate the fight, especially with the Morgott Shackle, which I think they needed to add, because this boss fight, for me, I could never beat him without the Morgott Shackle. This is one of the hardest boss fights for me. And I think it was smart that they added so little health and that his poise could be broken, because if not, this fight would be so unfair. Especially in this guy's second phase, he is so hard. He gives you no time to attack, and his charges are so delayed. Either they're so fast or they're so delayed. His hitboxes are pretty fucking crazy. Overall, this boss fight is so much harder than I think people say he is, and that's why I'm putting him here. Then in 3rd place, the big 3, getting the bronze medal, is the Sanctuary Guardian from Dark Souls 3. And every single time I fight this boss, it always grows on me. And I think of this boss similarly in the way as I do for Pinwheel. I think this boss has a really good moveset. He runs around the arena throwing crazy attacks at you, but he does have very little health and doesn't do that much damage. And since he's a lot easier than most of the bosses, he's a lot easier than every boss in the DLC, people kind of disregard him and don't give him any credit. And honestly, I would almost argue to put this guy in the top 5 especially if he had a little bit more health. I would definitely put this guy in the top 3. I mean, his attacks vary so much, you never really know what he's gonna do. Some of his attacks I don't really know how to predict and like what they do, like the shit where he goes up in the air and throws his wings down, like it just kind of staggers you and does nothing. But I honestly think it's really unique and really cool how he flies around, throws lightning bolts at you. He has a tail that you can cut off, and he's a tail that fucking poisons you, and I just think that shit's really cool and really unique. I love how he's a fucking flying lion with a fucking snake tail. I think that's all just super entertaining and super refreshing. And in second place is going to be the one and only boss from Dark Souls 2 that's going to be on this list. And I'm sorry to tell you, there's going to be no Demon Souls bosses on this list. But now, back to this boss. It is in the regular game. I'm just going to give you a second to guess of what it is. It is in the lava area, and that is the Old Iron King. And I'm assuming, well, I'm definitely knowing this is going to be a little bit, if not a very big hot take, because every Dark Souls 2 ranking or every Souls game ranking, this guy is almost every single time at the bottom of the list. And I think that is super unfair and just not true. This is one of my favorite bosses in Dark Souls 2. I think I've killed this guy around 60, maybe 70 times. And this is one of those boss fights where it's kind of a gimmick boss fight. Like, he's in the lava and he's not like on top of you, like he's like throwing attacks at you, you're kind of dodging while hitting him back. It's kind of like a 2D platformer game. I think it's super refreshing and super fun. For me, the only down part is the arena. There's a little hole in the back where you can kind of fall off, but honestly, you could just make the argue that you should just be aware in this fight and calm down, which I honestly think could be perfectly true. Now, for this boss fight, what makes it so fun for me is that you can master this boss fight. Like, there's so many hidden details, since it's such a unique and different type of boss fight that you can master. Like, he throws his attacks, obviously, like you're supposed to roll and hit his hand while it's there, or when he does that fire attack, you can roll through the fire and hit his head. But like, sometimes when he's in certain idle animations, you can hit his hand or just hit his horns in a certain way for some extra damage. And I just think this boss not only looks super cool, has a pretty cool soundtrack, I just love like the environment, how everything looks, and I just think this is a really good boss fight, super underrated. If you have Dark Souls 2, fight this boss right now. Tell me what you think in the comments, and on to the next boss, which is going to be the final boss that I'm going to be ranking. He's going to get the gold medal and be number 1 on my list. And before we get into that, just want to advertise one more time. Could you guys please like and perhaps even subscribe? And also, could you just leave a comment telling me what your favorite boss is, like what you think should have been on this list that wasn't, and like what you think that was on this list that shouldn't be. Just let me know in the comments, you know, tell me what I can do better, what I should do in the future, what type of videos I should make, and yada yada. And now for the number 1 boss on my list, we're going to be going back to Dark Souls Remastered, Dark Souls 1, whatever you want to call it. And this is definitely a hot take. I'm going to have to put Capra Demon. And now, obviously, I'm not saying it's the best boss on this list, but I definitely think it's the most underrated boss on this list. And I mean almost every single ranking I see has this boss in the bottom 3. Like, this is such a underrated, and in my opinion, such a good boss too. Now, firstly, before I say all the good things about this boss and glaze it, let's talk about some of the downsides, or quote-unquote downsides people tell about it. Firstly, the dogs. As soon as you enter, there's going to be some dogs pouncing on you, and if you're not prepared or don't have a strategy for it, they're going to bend you over and stick it in. Secondly, the run back. The run back from the regular route does take quite a while. You honestly could run past every single enemy, but it could be a little bit annoying, and sometimes you will die. There is also a shortcut that does reduce that time, but it's still a minute and a half, and it's still pretty annoying, but there is a lot worse runbacks in this game and in the Soul series as a whole. And the last thing people hate on is the camera, which I will admit the camera can be pretty annoying in this boss fight, but that's because this arena is so small. It's literally like 10 feet by 10 feet by 20 feet. It's a super small arena, but there's a lot worse camera fucking arena boss fights in this game and in every other Souls game. But I really do think the main source of hate is from these dogs. And honestly, I think this adds to the boss fight. I like this boss fight more with the dogs. I did die a couple times on my first playthrough, and it annoyed me a little, but I just realized, let me come in there with a different build, or let me figure out how to distract the Capra Demon while I run up the stairs and kill the dogs, which was really fun. This was one of the few boss fights that made you really have to think and come up with a plan and strategize. And once you kill those dogs, it just made the boss fight so much better because you could just enjoy it so much more. It just felt like a reward. Plus, the fucking ledges or whatever, like the staircase and stuff, just makes the fight so much better because there's so many ways to interact with the dogs and the Capra Demon. You can bait the Capra Demon to the back, run up the stairs, plunge attack him. I mean, the possibilities are endless with this arena and just the stuff that they give you. So I honestly think, even though this boss fight is hated on, they give you so much opportunities and different ways to make this boss fight fun, unique, and just personalized to you. And honestly, for the Capra Demon, I think he's a super simple yet good boss with a nice moveset, and that's all the glazing that I have to do. I want to keep this video under 15 minutes, so that's all I have to say. Thank you for watching, yada yada, and see you later.